Any golfers in the room? Anyone? Put hands up to play golf. Anyone? Great. I should be on a golf course teeing off in 10 minutes' time in Ireland playing one of the world's best golf courses called Paul Marnock. But I flew back last night to do this speech because I think it's an interesting topic, and what I'm going to do is kind of lead into this. So, look, as Tina just said, we're looking at sort of the topic is communication, consistency, and creativity. And to help me answer this question, I've been very, very privileged to have a gentleman who's been visiting the ProcureCons all around the world for many, many, many years. He won't like me saying that. A man who has worked in some of the world's leading brands: Sara Lee, Philips, Kraft, Nabisco, Reckitt's, to name but a few. A man who brings a lifetime's knowledge of procurement to the circuit here. Please welcome on stage Mr. Larry Smith. Thank you very much.
Where do you want to sit?
So what we're going to do is, let me just grab the clicker button again. We've got a few questions here, and hopefully what we're going to do is have some time at the end so that you guys can participate. But we're going to start off, Larry. Thank you very much for joining us. So what are today's challenges in the world of global procurement, what do you think right now?
Well, I think that it's the time of the big squeeze. So I think there's more and more pressure on budgets. There's more and more pressure on cash. So and you can see the media budgets decline, sales spend goes up. Nobody knows why. So there needs to be a global supply chain view of the marketing spend, which means you need to understand every single bit above the line, below the line. You need to understand what's really behind your working, non-working ratio. So there's a lot more pressure on that. We're not really moving because we saw some evidence that it's not really true, but there's more and more pull advertising coming out there versus push. We're getting into moving a little bit from agencies of records to a roster, the agency roster model. We've got more and more governance issues. We've got GDPR. We've got making sure you're not diluting your brand equity across markets. If you're in a global role, you've got originating markets. You've got adapting markets. You've got land markets. You need to make sure that they're paying up. You're going to make sure they're getting value for money because if they don't, they're going to get pretty loud about it. You need to be faster. You need to be nimbler. A lot of criticisms about the RFP process taking too long. You need integrated campaigns, which means you're not just talking about creative and you're not talking about a media flight. You're talking about a media-centric model that goes across platforms. You need to be planning your campaigns that way. And stakeholders are operating independently. They're reacting to a lot of the new needs in the marketplace. E-commerce, right? You've got e-commerce agencies springing up like mushrooms all around the world. It creates, getting content into those e-commerce sites. How are you going to do that? Mm-hmm. So it's really about managing a lot of the data, and it's from a procurement standpoint, you've got to be on top of all that, and you need to have your data act together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, what Sarah's topic earlier, I thought was actually quite valid because I think there's three words I think in the past 10 years, digital, big data, and content, and they're all kind of inextricably linked. But actually trying to define any single one of those is actually, I think, is a hard task because actually you need everything. You need the data to be able to create the content. You need the content to be able to create the digital campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So they're all inextricably linked. But if you take content as just a piece of information, it could be anything. And the data drives that information.
Right. So you can't just sit in a silo. You can't just sit in creative anymore. You just can't sit in media. You can't sit in, I'm going to be in charge of consumer promotion agencies. You can't look at it that way. Actually, you've never been able to look at it that way. I never have. But we've got a traditional category model that needs to change because it doesn't work that way anymore. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think technology being an enabler. In your experience, is there anything out there that can assist that?
Yeah. So, before I left my last company, we were hell bent on getting a dam up and running. So a few fits and starts, but we're getting there now. But there are companies like Adstream who can actually take existing data, gather it up. We were building a dam, but you really need to do that. That it's really important to have systems and data streams that allow marketers, finance, all basically every discipline that touches the supply chain to actually do their jobs and make their days great versus having them constantly flailing around looking for, static toolkits or brand compasses or whatever. You need to give them the information at their fingertips so they can actually do their job instead of wasting time.
Yeah. So how important is it to integrate with other partnerships? I mean, in your experience that you've had, are there any key partnerships that you think that you would have wanted to
Right.
explore?
Well, it's important, let's start with the marketing supply chain. Putting we called it a campaign development process. It started with a really good brief from the brand. It started with a media plan. It started with the creative agencies and whoever the key agencies were. We built this so that by the time an agency creative saw the brief, it was pretty clear as to what platforms this campaign was going to live on. And we went into production, the campaigns we would produce probably 90% of what we needed instead of going back, putting a TVC out and then waiting for the scores to come back and then doing something with digital. It had to all happen at once. And it's just happening more and more quickly. So that's really important to have all those agencies that are directly involved in that, above the line and below the line, fully integrated. And then from a systems standpoint, if you're going to have a system that gives you data, gives you feedback, gives you telemetry, gives you a dashboard, you're not going to get that from a patchwork of different systems that don't talk to each other. So you really need to be thinking integration.
Yeah. Interestingly, because some of that integration with different people that from a technology point of view, how do you think that is there any one key part of the technology supply chain that you think that would sort of drive some of that data technology?
Well, I think you need to look at where your data is coming from, and where you might have hidden source of data, like basically the distribution of spots to stations. But you also need to have alignment. This is two things that need to happen. You need to have alignment with your IT groups, your finance groups, and there has to be commitment at the C-level to make sure this is a long-term investment, and it's a slog, to be perfectly frank. But it's also important to find the partners from the tech side that can cover off on talent usage rights, that can cover off on do a really good dashboard as to what are you shooting? You're shooting 60s and you're actually broadcasting 15s. Why are you doing that? So there's a lot of ways to sort of bring a lot of technology together, but it all has to be linked.
Yeah.
And some of it comes together naturally, and there are some partnerships that happen naturally.
Very good. Okay, so how do you think that technology can help organize some of that chaos?
Yeah, so technology can do a lot of things. First of all, it's gonna allow continuous process improvement because you're going to be capturing your data. It's going to integrate inefficient processes. It's going to you're going to standardize process deliverables and toolkits. So as you go through that standardization, as you start to capture data, as your data gets better, we all complain about spend data, right? So you need to get this also needs to include, like if you're using Ariba, let's make sure that the taxonomy, the metadata is correct, that the Ariba taxonomy is correct, that we're actually understanding what we're spending. Because I did allude to, you cut media, all of a sudden trade spend explodes. Why? What is it? And you need to really grab that, because if you squeeze a balloon in one place, it expands somewhere else. You've got to understand why that's happening. So having a technology platform is going to allow you to make informed decisions. It's going to allow you to have a dashboard. It's going to allow you to improve processes and drive out waste and drive your brands.
It's interesting, actually. I'll put this out to the audience, actually. We found that we did a bit of a study internally, and we think as a result of some of the input of work that comes into our systems, that anything between 18 and 48% of all content that's created never actually leaves the station. So we're producing more content than we actually need. So is that something that echoes with people in the audience? No. I'm surprised at that. But I mean, it's about, I mean, for us, it's actually trying to help brands manage some of that wastage of data.
I agree.
Wastage of content.
You are producing more than you need.
Yeah.
And I think that's as we start to get, because you're producing, there's two continuums, right? There's the TV campaign, right? And what's happening now is you need fast and nimble, cheap and cheerful, stuff that's going to live very short-lived, that may be covered by in-house production. But you need all these things. But maybe you have to decide what's working, what isn't, what you really need and what you don't. And there are things that, the other thing that's happening that I noticed was that there's great work happening in the local markets that are technically adapt markets. You also need to grab some of that, pull that up into the dam, and globalize that. There were some great ideas that came out of small markets. And if you don't have a system that can capture that stuff other than marketing awards, you're going to lose that. So there's a whole, what's going to happen is if you follow this technology platform and build this thing, build a dam, and integrate all the different disciplines within the marketing supply chain, you're going to find out that your assets are going to work harder for you. It's the bottom line.
There's been a lot of talk recently with brands, I'm slightly going off piece here, Larry, but I know you'll have the answer for it, of brands looking to in-house. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
In-house for the right reasons.
Yeah.
In San Diego, we had a debate, and I think my concern, there's a couple of things. I think it's a great idea for cheap and cheerful, quick stuff that you need for e-commerce sites, but got to make sure your data streams are supporting that too. I think an in-house production needs to be supported by this type of automation. It can help defend and protect that organization. I also think you need to do the classic make-buy analysis on this and make sure you've got at least a 5 to 10 year commitment from your C-level, and not only to provide a career path for folks who are in this department, but also that you're keeping up with technology. If you look at companies that do this for a living, they're reinvesting in technology every quarter, right? And so you need to be really willing. It's not your core business. You got to be willing to nurture that department and make it everything it can be.
Yeah. And again, one of the other issues here, I think, because of the fragmentation of, the proliferation of media as it currently stands right now, we've got usage rights being flown around, going out all over the place. Where, I know clients have been exposed to usage rights violations. Yep. Is that something that, in your experience, you were starting to see?
The saddest thing is to see a great campaign, and you'll have markets that opt out. Oh, I'm not that interested. And then when they opt in, they discover that the actors in the TVC have suddenly picked up a show, and they're 3 times the cost. So I think that talent usage rights, especially in a global company and for global campaigns, cannot be an afterthought. It has to be considered right from the get-go. So, and I think, again, usage rights are a huge deal. So you want to make sure that you've got a dashboard that says, okay, if I'm going to pick up a campaign for transcreation and adaptation, I want to make sure I've got an instant sort of read on what the usage rights are.
Excellent. Look, we've got about 5 minutes left to run. I'd love to throw some questions out to the audience, to Larry and myself. Any questions?
You said earlier in the discussion, you mentioned a little bit about working and non-working, and it's a particular area of interest to me because my personal belief is that the definition of those terms is different today than it was when we all started our careers. And particularly when we look at systems like a dam or other processes and producing content, the way our businesses and the way our finance departments may not have been updating their definitions
Absolutely.
of working and non-working. And so I just wanted to ask if you would comment a little bit about that. Is there a formula change? Would you recommend that the industry review it because we're not all using the same
I think
terms?
this whole thing on working, non-working is a nightmare. And so, yes, actually, WFA, ANA, that's another thing that needs to be looked at because it's an archaic measure of, I think, efficiency. It only talks about really fees versus working. It's like, what is that, right? And so you'll get finance people rattling that off, and it's really never clear whether really anybody understands that definition. And then people get all whipped up about it when you see this artificial ratio being mentioned. And then we just talked about the proliferation of agencies and how marketing works, and a lot of that isn't included in the working, non-working ratio. So it has to go.
Yeah.
That's my personal, that's another industry, I think that should be an industry discussion, yes?
Do you think we're getting closer to, using technology to actually start getting an ROI?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why if you start capturing data, start building these dams, understanding how your supply chain works, getting the data, refreshing that, analytics, you can start having a more intelligent discussion beyond working, non-working about what the ROI on your marketing spend is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No, I'm interested because I was looking at, I did look at them a lot when I was at Diageo, and we put one in, but the reason we were putting it in is to measure marketing efficiency. So it was able to track how efficient our marketing people were at working with their agencies, because a project management team will effectively give you insights.
And it is possible to do that.
Yeah.
You should be thinking about that. There should be workflow. Obviously, you should be thinking workflow when you're building these things.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's the art of partnerships. That's about really sort of looking at, pick the best in breed off the shelf to be able to make sure that from a marketing supply chain, you're pulling in the right data at the right times.
Right.
And harnessing that in one place.
The other thing you want to do is make sure it's all hooked up and there aren't any outages.
Yeah, absolutely right, yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to have one company do it, but you need to select the right companies. Everybody's got a role.
I think we've got one more. Jane.
Yeah, sorry, Larry. We're looking at a dam soup to nuts. When you started this journey, how did you create your business case? Because we're actually struggling to make the numbers, the hard numbers, add up. There's a lot of supposition about what it will save you in terms of usage, what it will save you in terms of, to your point, having everything integrated in one place, speed to market, making your assets work harder. But it's all supposition and theoretical.
Well,
so it's just a question, because Sky is really heavy on factual, hard numbers.
Yeah, it's hard because you're trying to impose these systems on what is naturally a chaotic process, especially in a big organization. So I would say the first place you need to start is take a hard look at your AP data, and I can tell you I spent a lot of time staring at outputs from our Ariba system, trying to understand who the hell these people were. And we also, I think you also need to look at your marketing general ledger taxonomy, sales and marketing taxonomy, and make sure that you're categorizing spend. It's fundamental. It's like, okay, procurement 101, understand and categorize your spend. That's where you got to start off with. And then start identifying where, like, how many agencies do you have? What are your marketing, understand what your marketing budgets are. Take the data you have, clean it up as best you can, and superimpose it on current practice, and then start drawing inferences. That's the best way you can do it. And I guarantee you there are chunks of your spend that are just black boxes. Nobody knows what's in there. And you've got to start drilling into that too, because all you need to do is find some surprises that create aha moments for leadership, and you'll start to get the traction you need. But it isn't easy, and it requires a capital investment. It requires a commitment. That's why I said you need to get IT involved, but you need to make sure that you don't have multiple projects launching. You don't have people working across purposes. There has to be an organizational commitment to doing this, and it's not easy. There's no question about it. I hate to use that word, but it's a journey. But journey has to start with data and a strategy. Does that help?
Excellent. We've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Larry. Thank you very much. I look at that. I'm on the second green, and I've just done a birdie. Thank you very much indeed.